Hi, I'm Maggie Stiefvater, and this is my seminar on writing. I've been doing this professionally for just about a decade, and I reckon I've published over 1,000,000 words, and I'm about to talk to you about writing for just about 8 hours. But before I do, I feel like I need to say a somewhat lengthy disclaimer, and it's this. You might watch me talk about writing for 8 hours and learn absolutely nothing. Now, you might watch me talk about writing for 8 hours and come away with a great American novel, but I can't promise that, nor can I predict it. And it's because of this. Every brain is different. And moreover, this process we call novel writing is actually translation. It's a hugely complicated process where we take something that's abstract in our head and make it concrete. Now, this abstract thing, this novel in our mind, exists in its perfect form on the hard drive of your brain. It's beyond words, it's feelings, it's scenarios, it's all possibilities, and we must find a way to cram that into words, into something concrete for someone else to experience. The process of novel writing is about making those two visions as close as possible, to try and make the idea in our head look the same as the concrete version and vice versa. Like I said, I've been doing this for a decade and I'm still learning the tips and tricks for doing it. But the reason why my tips and tricks might not work for yours is because only you speak this language up here. So this translation process of making this abstract into that concrete, that's going to be custom. What you're actually doing is making a custom decoder ring just for you. Now, I have to admit that I find this concept somewhat daunting as a teacher. When I set up this seminar, I thought, how can I make it as useful for other writers as possible? Trying to think about all of the different ways that we write, all the different ways of getting things out of our head. It just stopped me in my tracks. And then I remembered about 5 years ago, I was asked to speak at the National Conference for the Society of Children's Books Illustrators and Writers. No, other way around. I always do it wrong. Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. It's a tongue twister. SCBWI. There you go. Anyway, it's a very big organization full of many published writers, and their national conference was very intimidating. I was supposed to speak on stage to these authors, many of them published, many of them well published, talk to them about writing, and I just thought, it's not like I'm talking to a crowd full of newbies. I can't just jump on the table and bewilder and bamboozle them by waving my arms about. I have to provide real content. I felt quite outclassed, really. I went to the organizer with my concerns, and she said, Maggie, look, you can't teach them how to write. Teach them how you write. Oh, sure, wisdom, fine, be that way. Anyway, that's what I'm going to do in this seminar. I'm not going to teach you how to write because there's 1,000,000 ways to write. There's 1,000,000 ways to translate this to this. And you have to learn a lot of it yourself. It's going to be custom-made parts just for you. But maybe some of my tips and tricks will help along the way. Now, there's another disclaimer I have to give, which is another reason why my tips and tricks might not work for you is because of this. Every writer has different goals. Some writers, they write to get an idea out of their head. Some of them write to exercise a personal ghost. Some of them write to retell a story they thought was always done wrong. Some of them write for fame. Some of them, there's 1,000,000 different reasons why people put pen to paper. And if your priorities aren't the same as mine, you're going to have different ways of looking at writing. For me, I always knew what kind of writer I wanted to be. Ever since I was small, I wanted to be the kind of writer that you walked into the Costco and on the table you saw stacks of books, and you would walk through the airport, see cardboard stands, and there would be the books stuffed in there, and you know exactly what kind of books I'm talking about. They always have the writer's name bigger than anything, and then a little title. It's always like, Maggie Stiefvater, dead man running. Maggie Stiefvater, point blank. Maggie Stiefvater, called down the hawk. My goal was always commercial fiction. Commercial fiction, the goal is always going to be about accessibility. It's got priorities that involve thinking about the other person all the time. You're thinking about the reader, putting themselves in their shoes. It's got a lot of compromise. Sometimes it means changing things around to make it easier for them to understand or to make the story simpler. Yeah, commercial fiction. That's what all of my writing advice is, seen through that lens of being as commercial as possible. Is that the best way to write? Absolutely not. Is it the only way to write? Absolutely not. Do I try and do it as well as possible? Yes, I absolutely do. But that means that when you hear my tips and tricks, sometimes you'll hear something which just absolutely feels wrong, and just throw it out. Just throw it out. You might have to throw out 90% of this, but if you get 10% tips and tricks, you know what? I'll consider it a success. Now, okay, onto the game plan for this seminar. What we're going to try and do is we're going to try and move from internal to external, because after all, that's the way you write a book, right? Starts in your head, gets made into words, and eventually, hopefully, it lands in the reader's hands on the other side. Now, I know that it's a somewhat unpopular idea to suggest that you think about the reader before the very end. A very commonly quoted piece of advice is that you're supposed to write for yourself, write from the heart, only for you. And that's fair. I would never take that away from you. But for me, that doesn't work. For me, I'm a storyteller, and a story is not complete until you have an audience. To me, it doesn't seem valuable to write a funny scene if I'm not making someone else laugh. I don't understand why I'm spending hours on making a chapter as miserable and sad as I possibly can if I don't have the proof of someone else's tears. For me, all of this process of writing, the translation, it's for them. If I want the perfect, unvarnished version of the story, well, it's plain up there already. I don't need to do all of this busy work. So for me, internal to external, always thinking about that goal, which is to put it in someone else's hands. Now, I think it's very easy to get frozen up imagining that the end product has to be perfect to end up in someone else's hands. Imagining criticism and people not liking your work can often stop you in your tracks. I think it's important that you do the internal to external in the proper order, and that keeps you from getting that deer in the headlights look. Imagine it like you're going to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk. Get in your car, go and park, go into the store, get the milk, give someone money, the milk is yours. You're not going to get into the car and then just start throwing money out the window. Wrong order, crazy talk. That will never get you milk. We want a gallon of milk. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Moving on. Here's our actual plan. Act 1, internal. We're going to talk about everything that is about developing an idea in the abstract. Everything before you write words on paper. Doing as much of the work as possible before we actually begin to type, setting ourselves up for success. Act 2 is going to be about writing, the actual mechanics, typing, the toolbox. It's going to be about paragraph, shape, chapter, length, drafting, strategies. And then Act 3 is going to be external, everything that has to do with your manuscript right before and right after it gets into someone else's hands. Critique, editing, revision, the head game of having your work out there. And I think ultimately what I want you guys to remember is this. This should be fun. Now, I don't mean it should be easy. In fact, if it's easy, you're probably doing it wrong. It's going to be hard. And I don't mean that you're going to be happy all the time either. You're going to write crap. Who wants to write crap? That's not fun. It is kind of fun. It's kind of challenging. It's a most excellent game. But the thing about games is that they're really the most fun if you know what's going on. So hopefully this toolbox will help out with that. Okay, let's go.